I'll tell you, folks, we have a very distinguished guest today on our program, on the Newsmaker Show. He is a graduate of Hamilton College, undergraduate, then graduated from Harvard, which is always very impressive, then joined the faculty at Cornell University. If you're not impressed yet, you ought to be, where he teaches in the law school at Cornell. All of these things very, very impressive credential-wise. His name is William Jacobson, and he'll be joining me for a wide range of topics on the Newsmaker Show.
Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Okay, Professor, may I call you Prof, Professor William Jacobson?
Sure.
Do students still use the term prof?
They actually do, yes.
Good. Then things haven't changed as much as I thought. Prof, let's start off with Israel. I know that Israel's very much in the news now, defending itself from all those, I think, stupid attacks coming in from Hamas. And I want to say something and get your reaction to it. It seems to me that Hamas does not give a hoot for the Palestinian people because they know full well when they launch one of those rockets, they're going to get it back in spades, and they're probably not going to damage Israel seriously. But their own people in Gaza and maybe the West Bank, they're going to get nailed. So they certainly don't care about their own people. Would that be your assessment?
Well, that's my assessment, but I think you have to approach it from how do they see the world. And what they see the world is their goal is the destruction of Israel. Mm-hmm. Their goal is not building a prosperous community where they currently control the territory, which is Gaza, and to a lesser extent, Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank. So think about it. Israel pulled out of Gaza in, I think it was 2005, and the Palestinians had an alternative. The Gaza has a beautiful coastline, really could have turned it into a jewel of the Mediterranean. Instead, they elected Hamas to power. Hamas turned it into an Iranian proxy terrorist state and has been waging war against Israel in various means, tunnels under the border, all sorts of other things, rockets, suicide bombings, whatever it happens to be. That's the direction they chose. And the reason they chose that is building a safe and prosperous and free community is not their goal. So when you look at it and you say they don't give a hoot about the Palestinians, I think that's right from any rational perspective, but that's not their perspective on it. Their perspective is the only way that they will ultimately measure success is the damage they do to Israel and continuing this war against Israel that will never end. So I agree with you. From any rational point of view, they're essentially suicidal. They've done tremendous harm to their own people, but that's what they're about, and they were elected, and they're apparently fairly popular still with their people. So just as we often say you get the government you choose, well, they've chosen Hamas, and they're dealing with the consequences of it.
Okay, now, listen, I don't know what the future holds. Neither do you, really. We don't know. Only God knows. But it seems to me that Hamas and or Hezbollah, another enemy of Israel, will ever be strong enough to really overcome the Israeli Defense Force and the determination of the Israeli government. What is your take on that?
In a strict military sense, I think that's true. They can certainly do damage, and Hezbollah has a lot more firepower than Hamas has, Hezbollah being in Lebanon, and Iran supplies them all with missiles and other armaments. But I think what they view it, they don't view it as they're going to sweep across the border and take large areas of territory. I don't think they're so unrealistic as to expect that. What they try to do is they try to keep the pressure on Israel week after week, month after month, decade after decade. And they seek to weaken Israeli society, to weaken Israeli resolve, to make life miserable for people there so that hopefully in their minds they'll leave the country. And at the same time, they actually welcome Israeli retaliation because the more Palestinian or Lebanese civilians that get killed in retaliation weakens Israel internationally. So they're playing a longer game than we're used to seeing people play. They don't care if it's this year or next year. What they want is the international community to put pressure on Israel and isolate Israel and damage Israel. And the best way they can do that is to get Israel to retaliate. And that's why you see Hamas in Gaza right now using civilians explicitly, making announcements that civilians should be human shields, that when Israel warns that a particular building is targeted, and what other military gives this sort of warning, but Israel does, they tell people to run to the roof. They tell people not to evacuate when Israel gives a warning. They want civilians to be killed because it's part of their overall goal of weakening Israel internationally. And you see, this is a pattern we've seen numerous times, even in the last couple of decades, that there'll be some terror attack, there'll be some rockets, there'll be whatever it is. Israel retaliates, and who does the international community condemn? It condemns Israel for retaliating.
UN's already done that, hasn't it?
Strategy.
Mm-hmm. Hasn't the UN already done that this time?
Believe it or not, the statement the UN issued, which is a non-binding statement by the Security Council, was fairly neutral. One thing we haven't seen this time around, usually it's a day or two before the international community puts pressure on Israel. It hasn't happened yet, but it's on the cusp of happening. And the reason it hasn't happened as quickly this time is even the hostile governments understand that this was something completely precipitated by Hamas. Even Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, who's a rival of Hamas, but who's, in a sense, their president, has come out and said, what Hamas are you trying to accomplish by firing these rockets at Israel? So I think that the international community has given Israel more time, but I think where they're going to draw the line is some sort of ground invasion. I think, and you saw it today, there was a press statement by the White House press spokesman warning against a ground invasion. Really, the only way that Israel probably can put an end to the rocket fire is some sort of action on the ground, for the very reason that Hamas parks its missiles in apartment buildings, underneath hospitals, in areas it knows that Israel cannot attack without causing tremendous civilian damages. And that's the dilemma Israel faces. You've got somebody firing missiles into your cities, which fortunately they have some missile defenses, but firing hundreds of missiles into your cities at random, trying to kill your civilians. They are hiding among civilians. You essentially have a double war crime by Hamas. They fire missiles from civilian areas, using civilians as human shields, and they fire them randomly into civilian populations. And that presents a dilemma for Israel. And you see what happens is when Israel retaliates, and when you retaliate, a missile's going to miss its mark, or there are going to be people who didn't evacuate the building, or something else is going to go wrong, and there are going to be civilians killed. But Israel's in this very difficult dilemma that it doesn't want to kill Palestinian civilians. On the other hand, no nation can live with an organization like Hamas, which seeks to destroy it, firing dozens and dozens and hundreds of missiles into your city. So it's a very difficult dilemma. But this time, the international community has been much less active. Egypt hates Hamas. Egypt did away with the Muslim Brotherhood, which was essentially the parent of Hamas. So Egypt is not doing anything to help Hamas this time. They've closed the borders. They're not letting any reinforcements in. They're not allowing Hamas fighters out. So it's a little bit different, but that will all change, my prediction, the second Israel has some sort of land invasion, which I think it's eventually going to have to do.
Okay, I have a lot of other things to ask you about Israel, but we have to move on. Let's talk about, by the way, I'm speaking with, for the first time, I hope not the last, Professor William Jacobson, who's teaches in the law department at Cornell University, is himself a graduate of Harvard. Prof, let's talk a moment about the kids on the border coming across. We had a report yesterday that the bodies of little children are washing up on the Rio Grande on our side. This is a tragic thing, and it seems to me that there has to be a solution, but I haven't heard anything from Obama that makes me confident. Of course, Congress is always divided. What is your view on all this?
Well, it's certainly a tragic humanitarian situation. You've got thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of minors who have been essentially abandoned by their parents, sent to the border without any accompaniment by a parent or guardian, with the hope that they will be allowed to stay in the U.S. And it looks like they probably will be. And so to that extent, it's an effective tool, but it's a really tragic situation because you have families being split up. You've got children being handed over to these, gangs that traffic in people. I forget what they're called. And
Coyotes.
It's a bad situation, but it's a situation which didn't have to occur. It occurred for a reason. And the reason it occurred is the word was out that because the Obama administration was not going to vigorously enforce the immigration laws, if you came here, you would get to stay. It's what everybody fears about amnesty or variations on amnesty, is that once you offer that carrot to people, break the law, come here, and you'll get to stay, you can never stop it because the conditions in the third world are so horrible that there's an inexhaustible supply of people who would be willing to break our laws to come here if they thought they could stay. And that's what happened. You had, if not explicitly, certainly implicitly, a message sent that if you get here, if you make it across the border, you will get to stay. And that's why what we've seen on the border is very unusual. We don't see the traditional issue of someone coming across the border and then running and trying to avoid capture. Here we have them coming across and looking for immigration agents to turn themselves over to because they're not afraid of being repatriated or being sent back to their home countries because the word is out they'll get to stay. And that does look like what's going to happen. We've got buses and airplanes full of these people who came here illegally being sent to various locations around the U.S. because Texas doesn't have the facilities for all of them. And then they're given a court date to show up, and maybe 10% of them actually show up. The rest just melt into society, and they'll be here as many other millions of people illegally, and they will eventually, I have no doubt, be given some promise that they'll be legalized, and maybe they'll get to bring family members here. So it's a very terrible situation, but it's a situation which was created by our own government's messaging, and that messaging being, if you get here, we will not send you back.
Now, there's a bill sent to Congress by President Obama, nearly $4 billion, and as I understand it, the bulk of that money would go toward resettlement in places like Elmira. They haven't given up on that, by the way. Resettlement of these young people and others, as well as hiring lawyers at taxpayer expense to defend them, and practically nothing on border security. I think anyone who listens to my program on a regular basis knows I don't have a lot of high regard for Barack Obama. But it seems to me that what he's doing here is really unforgivable. What is your response?
Well, I'm not that familiar with the specifics of his request for the $4 billion or what's in that, but the point is that there has been a conscious effort to portray people who want to enforce existing immigration laws that have been on the books, passed by both houses of Congress, signed into law by presidents, that somehow enforcement of those laws is now deemed as heartless and inhumane, when in fact what's inhumane is this promise that's drawing people from third world countries to abandon their children at the border, that if you get here, you can stay. And that's the problem. So I don't know the details of this $4 billion request. I do know that the Obama administration's policy is to have as many people who came here in violation of our laws get to stay as possible, and to use that allowance, that amnesty, if you will, for family reunification to bring more people here. That's their goal. That's their political strategy. And we see it playing out in a number of different ways.
We're going to take a break. I'm talking with Professor William Jacobson of Cornell Law School. Very distinguished record. And when we get back, I want to ask him if Eric Holder is right when he says, and he did say this, that the reason people oppose him and Barack Obama is because of race. We'll find out what the good professor thinks after this. Professor William Jacobson, Cornell University, my guest today. We've talked about the tragedy in Israel and in Gaza, where the poor people are getting nailed by their own representatives. Hamas doesn't give a hoot for their own people, and I wish they'd wake up to that fact, but who knows. Then we talked about the tragic situation of kids on the border. Now I want to move to the statement by Eric Holder this week that people oppose him, the Attorney General, and Barack Obama for reasons of race. You buy into that, Professor?
Well, I did listen to his statement, and what he said is that, quote-unquote, some people do that. Now, by definition, yes, quote-unquote, some people do. You know, of the tens of millions or 100 million people who oppose Obama's policies, yes, there are, quote-unquote, some, but it's a small amount. And to even bring that up as a matter worth talking about, I think, is the issue. Because what does some mean? Is he suggesting that a large percentage, et cetera? So, yes, there are some racists who oppose Obama. There are some racists who support Obama. But that's not the point. But this is a pattern we've seen even during the campaign in 2008, the Democratic primary campaign. Bill Clinton famously complained on a radio show about how Obama's supporters were helping him and arguing that he's playing the race card on me. That was Bill Clinton who said that. Mm-hmm. And he had to kind of walk that back, but the recording is still there. And they've used, Holder has and Obama's supporters have, whenever an issue gets tough for him from a policy point of view, whenever he's done something that's unjustifiable, they will raise the race issue as a means of shutting down the conversation and shutting down the debate. And that's essentially what Holder was doing. It's not so much that he made an outrageously untrue statement, because, yes, quote-unquote, some people have that motivation. It's the bringing it up, the point that it's something worth arguing about. And it's not the first time Holder has done it. He's done it before, and Obama's done it before. And, you know, so that's, I think, the issue, is that when going gets rough for them, they bring up the race card and use that to shut down the dialogue.
All right. Now I want to move on to something closer to home. You live in Ithaca, because that's where Cornell is. And Martha Robertson, who was a big shot in the legislature, the county legislature in Tompkins County, is opposing Congressman Tom Reed. Now, let me preface this, Prof, by saying, puts Mrs. Robertson, or I don't know if it's Mrs. or Miss, she puts us in a spot, we in the media, because we have a policy here at this radio station, and most people do. If we have one candidate on the air, we immediately try to contact the other. We don't have to do that. It's up to them to contact us. But we immediately reach out to the other candidate and offer them equal time. We cannot get Martha Robertson to come on I want to underline that, any of our programs, or to react to any charges made against her. Now, you live in Ithaca. You might even know the lady. What's going on here?
Well, I don't know her personally, but I have covered this race very closely ever since the fall. In fact, my website has discovered a lot of the material through our research that has become a big issue in the campaign. So we were the ones who discovered that she sent out a fundraising solicitation in late September of last year, claiming that GOP operatives had hacked her website during the fundraising period, and she used that as an excuse to ask for more money. It wasn't true. We've asked for proof of it. Other media has asked for proof of it. She avoids the question. She said she was going to hire an investigator to prove it, and she said she wasn't going to hire an investigator. So that's one issue that we found about her. We're the ones who found the old videos of her arguing for single payer and arguing that Obamacare was just the means by which we would get to single payer. So I have followed this race extremely closely, and I have experienced exactly what you have experienced. You cannot get a response out of their campaign. You cannot get a response out of her. It is the strangest campaign. It's like they have her cloistered in a bubble that she only will appear with friendly media. She probably doesn't want to appear on your show because somebody might think you ask her difficult questions.
I would.
And I'm not the only one who's experienced this. Mainstream reporters, for TV reporters, have experienced the same thing. It's a very strange campaign. It's almost like the strategists have decided that we're just going to present you and package you the way we want to, and anything you say to local media, much less local bloggers or local radio, can only disrupt that. And it's just a very strange campaign. I don't know what's going on over there, but I have seen this tactic before. She's got a lot of money behind her, a lot of national money flowing in. She's what they call a red to blue candidate for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That's their highest tier of candidate. It's the ones where they think they can flip a seat from red to blue, and they think they can do that here. Whether they can or not is a different question. But so they're giving her a lot of money. I assume she has high-level strategists who've decided we're going to package you the way we want, and we're not going to let you get to the media. And that's a problem. So what your experience, I stopped emailing them for comment because after time and again, they never respond. I'll email and say, here's an issue. I'd like to have your side presented because I write at a website called Legal Insurrection, which gets a lot of attention. I want to present your side. Would you give me a statement? And I don't hear back from them. It's just a very strange campaign, and I don't know if it's going to work. Maybe it'll work in some markets. I don't know if that's going to work up here.
Our time is gone, Prophet. I just want to tell you that there are some political insiders in the Reid campaign who've told us they don't know either, but they've told us they think she might be waiting till the very end and then a blitz, just when people become conscious. Oh, there's an election next year or next week or next month. So we'll have to see if that's what her strategy is. Meanwhile, our time is gone, and I promised you I would give you a chance to plug your website, which I must tell, your blog, I should say, which is very interesting, and I forgot to do that after the break. You managed to work it in. So give it to us again.
Sure. I have two main websites. The first one is Legal Insurrection, which covers politics, some law, but mostly politics. And then I have a website called College Insurrection, which covers kind of some of the craziness going on campuses. So legalinsurrection.com is my main website.
Okay, we'll check both and have you back. And, Prof, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Professor William Jacobson, Cornell University in the School of Law. And we never got to Lois Lerner, but that may take care of itself. I wanted to get his legal opinion on what's going to happen there. I'll certainly have the Prof back if he'll agree. Meanwhile, stay tuned now for more news and information on the station where news comes first, AM 1480 WLEA.